Let's do it. It's go time.
Welcome to Go Time, your source for wide-ranging discussions from all around the Go community. Have you heard? Our Ship It podcast is back. Justin Garrison and Autumn Nash cover everything that happens after Git Push. Give it a listen at shipit.show. Big thanks to our partners at Fly.io, the home of changelog.com. Easily launch your app close to your users all around the world. Find out how at Fly.io. Okay, here we go.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Go Time, which is going to be exploring the use of Go in art, in visualizations, playing a role that we don't usually hear that much about when we're talking about Go, which is why I'm so excited for us to be diving in and chit-chatting today. And I am joined by the wonderful Anthony Starks, who is...
Hello, everyone.
Hello. He is an independent developer, designer, interested in data visualizations, generative art, building tools, and really just overall the combination of art, visuals, and code. His career began in the 1980s as an IT person for pharma, and it's really blossomed since then. He's created several open source tools, including SVGo, DEC or DEC-SH, which is a markup and domain-specific language kind of information display and presentation package, and dchart, which is a charting package built in DEC. And then in 2019, he made a digital recreation of the Dubois data stories using DEC-SH, which we're going to be hearing a little bit more about. But welcome to the show, Anthony. How are you?
Thanks, everyone. I'm well.
So we're going to dive right in with how did you end up combining Go visualization and getting into this whole space? I'd love to hear almost the origin story of you using Go in this way.
So the origin story, let's go back to, let's say, 2008, even before Go came. I attended a conference called Art and Code at Carnegie Mellon, where they were using, the whole idea was to combine those two domains together. There was a guy there who had co-created something called processing. I don't know if your audience knows about this, but it was created, again, to bring designers and coding together. And that's where sort of my eyes really opened about the combination of bringing art and code together. In my work, as an IT person, I had to do lots of charts and graphs and things like that. And I found out that I realized that the program could do it better than I did because I hated pushing pixels around. I could never get to what I exactly wanted. But because I was a developer, I could create it myself. So when Go came on the scene in 2009, I instantly hopped on it because it seemed like a programming language that sort of fit my style. I had done C before and so forth. And that led to, I had written some code to do SVG generation before in Java. I said, let me try this in Go. And the rest is history. In fact, that's how I met you, Angelica.
Yes.
In a meetup in New York City, I was explaining SVG Go, and that's where I met you. So the rest is history.
The rest is history. I'd love to hear kind of with that initial exploration of using Go, what worked well? What did you have to kind of work a little bit more hard to make Go play nice doing? I kind of would love to hear how that initial, and then maybe a little bit about how some of the improvements, the changes to Go over the years that you've observed have made it harder, easier.
So, things like working from structs and being able to take data from structs and then extracting that out and then going from another representation of that. That worked really well for me because, I had created sort of my own markup language to doing those sort of architectural diagrams. I did it in XML at the time. I'm still an XML proponent, although it's kind of fallen on hard times. But being able to marshal and unmarshal that data in XML and just representing your data in structs and then being able to walk those structs and then do your presentation from that was a game changer. That really helped me out. I'm sort of a command line guy, so being able to write code that can work on the command line, can work in pipelines, was also very, very useful. So yeah, so these things have all sort of stayed with Go, and they've just been a lot better. Yep.
So when we're thinking about working with Go to create visualizations of this nature, are there types of visualizations that lend themselves better to the use of Go versus other languages? Or is it really across all visualizations as we're thinking about charts, as we're thinking about diagrams? It's really, there's not a huge delineation between type of visualization and the use of Go.
So there really isn't, but let me tell you sort of my philosophy. So one of the things that I did when I did DexShow was I was very frustrated with things like PowerPoint. And I wanted to take things down to their sort of fundamental levels. What are we working with? We're working with a canvas. Okay, on that canvas, what are we working with? We're working with text and placing that text. What are we doing? We've got certain graphical elements. We've got circles and lines and ovals and those kinds of things. So that was sort of informed from my work with SVG, where it has elements for each of the elements of your visual. And the thing that pattern that I came to is, okay, now that we have this canvas, now let's figure out programmatically, how do we arrange things on that canvas in an interesting way? And now, because you've got a programming language, you can represent those relationships programmatically. So you can take this element and work them together, right? And then you can also bring in data, structured data, CSVs, TSVs, whatever, marshal them into whatever data structures are appropriate, and then spit out the visual representation at the end. Now, the nice thing is because we're working with markup languages and that kind of thing, you can take other code to create and digitize those markup languages, like you can go from SVG to PDF to even pings. Again, you're working with sort of a vector orientation. And then from there, the way I think about it is all the ways that sort of a particular designer will work with something like Illustrator. They're working in those higher level concepts. I'm doing it the same way, but in code. And because I'm doing that, again, I can represent things in code that might be sort of hard to do or tedious to do when you're working and pushing pixels around. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So you've kind of already made reference to a few of the packages that you've kind of built out for our wonderful community to use, but I'd love to kind of double click into them a little bit. So could you introduce us to the various different packages that you've created, their purposes, and how our lovely listeners, might be able to use them?
So the first one, we can start with SVG Go. That was created, that's the oldest one. Started in March 2010. So, Go was sort of introduced to the world in November 2009, and a few months later, SVG Go was born. So that is the ability to, again, take data from whatever and take those high-level concepts in SVG and make a picture. So, sort of the subtype I like is programming pictures, right? So that's sort of what we've been doing. Subsequently, I created other tools, so I use that a lot for generating SVG. So just one more thing that I want to say is in all my packages, I really spend a lot of time on the documentation. And because these are visual tools, it's really important to make sure that we've got really nice illustrations for everything. So I just wanted to put that in there. So that's SVG Go. So let's go back to like 2013, 14, something like that. Again, in the corporate world, things don't exist unless they're on a PowerPoint. right? So, a lot of the world's knowledge is sort of locked up in PowerPoint. And I've been doing a lot of PowerPoint and that kind of thing. And again, I'd use SVG Go for doing, again, architectural diagrams. I had my own sort of markup language that was specific for those kinds of things. Again, you could have used Visio and those kinds of things, but whenever I wanted to make a tool, I would make a bespoke tool for a particular kind of visual using SVG Go. But, it didn't really quite work to make that as a PowerPoint. So I said, what are the things that build a nice PowerPoint? I became sort of a student of what makes a good presentation. Looking at Steve Jobs's keynotes and those kinds of things, using things like Keynote on the Mac. Said, what are the things that really make that? So one of the insights was start with a blank canvas. Throw out all of the defaults that the tools give you and start with a blank canvas. And again, that's another sort of learning, is the defaults that you get with things like PowerPoint and Excel and those kinds of things are terrible. They're really bad. Maybe they'll be better in this age of AI, but right now they're bad. And a lot of bad visuals and things have been foisted on the world because people just click on the default, and it's not their fault. Anyway, so pulling back, I said, remember the present tool that the early Go developers created? I said, well, you know what? Let me make a parser for that so that I can sort of build those kinds of things. And then from there, I said, wait a second, what am I doing? Because it was not really specified anywhere, the grammar or anything about that, I said, let me pull back and let's create a bespoke markup language just for presentations. So the whole thing is a deck, and then within the deck you've got slides, and then within slides you've got text and graphics. Okay, that's sort of the basics. So given that, I created this tool to do that, and it's interesting, the first client was built for Raspberry Pi, okay? Because it had nice graphics, and I had sort of a 2D graphics library that I was working with at the same time. So I could create, nice presentations and around that on the Raspberry Pi. But because you had a markup language, you can take that as a basis. So, let's make an SVG out of it. Let's make a PDF out of it. Let's make a ping out of it. So from there, you can create a whole deck, and then boom, you've got your PDF, and then nobody knows that you didn't do it with PowerPoint or whatever. It's just a PDF and slides, and you can walk through it. So that's sort of the beginning of that. And then after that, I built another tool on top of that called dchart, deck charts, that uses the elements. So it turns out those fundamental elements that you can use are also perfectly great for making charts and graphs. So for example, if you wanted to make, let's say, a bar chart, what are the elements of a bar chart? We've got numbers along the bottom, and you've got lines that make the bars. They can go this way or this way, and you just lay them out. So one of the things that I also want to mention is all of these tools use a simplifying thing called a canvas, but that canvas is percent based. So it doesn't matter what the aspect ratio is. Everything goes from X from Y from 0 to 100. Okay? And it uses the coordinate system that you learned in elementary school. X goes from left to right, increasing. Y goes from bottom to top, increasing, which is sort of flipped from typical graphics programming. But from sort of a user's perspective, or from my perspective, that was a fundamental sort of insight. Then you can just sort of say, if I want something in the middle, it's at 50-50. Boom, there it is. And it doesn't matter what size the canvas is. The size of the canvas can be this way, it can be this way. It doesn't matter. It scales to it. So you only have to remember numbers from 0 to 100. So that makes it easier to think about and to reason about. And it also simplifies your layout because, again, you can think in those very simple terms of where things are going to go. So that was, so we were talking about dchart. So dchart is built on DEC, which is the markup language. So therefore, your charts and your other elements are no different. There's no sort of pasting it in or whatever. It becomes a fundamental part of it. And then from there, that became a library that you can embed. And then again, you can have other programs that work together. Again, all of my tools are command line based. So you work on the command line, you can build your own tools around that. And again, from there, so before I'd been writing sort of the markup language in raw XML like sort of a caveman. But realized, wait a second, I can create a domain-specific language that will abstract. In many ways, it's a one-to-one. So if I want to draw a line, it's, the line command looks like sort of the line markup. But you have other larger things, like if you wanted to draw a star, that's actually a polygon, for example. So you sort of work in those kinds of terms. And I sort of built up the things as I needed them. So if I needed something that wasn't there, I would just create an element in the markup language and then create a way to express it, and away I went. So that was DEC shell. And again, in 2019, I learned about the work of W.E.B. Du Bois at the 1900 Paris Exposition, where he wanted to tell the world the progress of African Americans since emancipation. And he used a series of charts and graphs to do this, and it was all documented in a book. The name of the book is W.E.B. Du Bois, Data Portraits Visualizing Black America. And in this book, they have each of these, they were large poster size things. And I said, you know what? I'm developing these tools concurrently with learning about that. Why don't I start and try to recreate them? So I was on vacation, said, let me start, see how far I can get. So there are around 60 visualizations in the book, and started in July of 2019, and I finished by October. So it took a few months to do it, but once they were done, I had this nice collection. I had learned a lot about how do you develop a domain-specific language. Just build. So again, the philosophy is let's start from the minimum, and then let's just build only as we need it, going up further. So that's sort of the journey of those sort of sets of tools.
What you're about to hear are real reactions from PagerDuty users in response to seeing signals from Fire Hydrant for the first time.
PagerDuty, I don't want to say they're evil, but they're an evil that we've had to maintain. I know all of our engineering teams, as well as myself, are interested in getting this moving the correct direction. As right now, just managing and maintaining our user seats has become problematic.
That's really good. Actually, this is a consistent problem for us and teams. Is that covering these sorts of ad hoc time frames is very difficult. Putting in like overrides and specific days and different new shifts is quite onerous.
Well, and you did the most important piece, which is didn't tie them together, because that's half the problem with PagerDuty, right? Is I get all these alerts, and then I get an incident per alert. And generally speaking, when shit goes sideways, you get lots of alerts because lots of things are broken, but you only have one incident.
Yeah, I'm super impressed with that, because being able to assign to different teams is an issue for us, because like the one alert fires for one team, and then it seems like to have to bounce around, and it never does. Which then means that we have tons of communication issues because like people aren't updated.
No, I mean, to be open and honest, when can we switch?
So you're probably tired of alerting tools that feel more like a headache than a solution, right? Well, Signals from Fire Hydrant is the alerting and on-call tool designed for humans, not systems. Signals puts teams at the center, giving you the ultimate control over rules, policies, and schedules. No need to configure your services or do wonky workarounds. Ingest data seamlessly from any source using webhooks and watch as Signals filters out the noise, alerting you only on what matters. Manage tasks like coverage requests and on-call notifications effortlessly within Slack. You can even acknowledge alerts right there. But here's the game changer. Signals natively integrates with Fire Hydrant's full incident management suite. So as soon as you're alerted, you can seamlessly kick off and manage your entire incident inside a single platform. Learn more or switch today at firehydrant.com/signals. Again, firehydrant.com/signals.
I'd love to hear kind of that Dubois visualization and how it grew into which was what I first heard about this through, was the Dubois Visualization Challenge.
Yeah, so I had created the visualizations, done a couple of presentations and things like that about it at local meetups. And one of the persons who was there, Alan Hillary, got on a call with another colleague, Seiko Tyler. He said, you know what? Why don't we sort of do what you did, but let's challenge the rest of the community, the visualization community, social science, to recreate them. And that was in 2021. So part of that process is, again, first thing you've got to do is curation. So of those sort of 60 visuals, you have to pick them that would, one, be appealing for people to recreate, two, that has various skill levels because everybody's not the same, and have a good visual variety. So first step is we create them. We started off with actually 7, but then it expanded to 10, and the idea was to create one visual per week, post it, and we started off just on Twitter, post it on Twitter, have people use the # Du Bois challenge. And then right now we do it by year. So this year it's # Du Bois Challenge 2024, and you can follow that on social media. So we just had people say, and we had very few rules. The only rules were and we would post the originals, and I would have a little blurb about each one, sort of explaining what the context was, what was the story behind it. And that's really, you may have heard the term storytelling with data. That's sort of one of the things that are coming out. Each one of these things tells a story, and it supports the overall story that Du Bois was trying to say was, we're here, we're part of this nation, and he was combating sort of some racism that said, well, Black people are inferior, but he was trying to show with data, charts and graphs, also photographs, we're here, we're prosperous, we've made this much money, we own this much land, this is how we spend our time, this is how we spend our money. So going back to that, there's curation, and we would say, okay, week 1, here's a chart. And the response was completely overwhelming to us. People would take it and they would sort of do what I did, which was try to be very faithful to the original. But other times people would say, you know what, I'm just going to use this as an example. Let's pour, so this data was from, the 1900. Let's pour some current data into it, right? We have people from all over the world. So there is a guy named Caro Bernardes from Brazil. He always participates. So he takes data from his native land, Brazil. So for example, in many cases, there are maps of the United States. He will use maps of Brazil. Last year, we had someone participate in Romania, and he would do the same kinds of things. So the idea was, again, learn visualization, learn some history, take it and make it relevant to today. So that's the Du Bois Challenge. Started very small, but right now we started off just with Twitter/X. We've now expanded it to the Data Visualization Society Slack. We've expanded it to LinkedIn. You might not think this, but there's a large community on LinkedIn who are really into it as well. We're doing it on Mastodon, and we're also doing it, again, on all of these social media platforms. So it's very nice to be able to see the community come together and try to recreate and learn the story as well.
And are you seeing most people using your libraries, other libraries, or other tooling that you're seeing a lot of people use? Is it all Go based? I'd love to hear a little bit about like any patterns in or changes over the years of how people are approaching these challenges technically.
Right. I don't know if anybody else is using my tools but me, but that's okay. A lot of people are using things like Tableau and R because, again, when you look at the data, it's kind of social science data, and that tends to be used there. So Tableau and R are big ones. People are using things like D3 and Svelte, and they're using whatever is at hand. But again, for me, Go is the best way to do this.
For sure. And then I know you're also, there's another challenge that I only recently found out about from you, which was all around January. So now that we're recorded, we're out of January now. I would love to hear a little bit about what is it, how is it different from the Du Bois Challenge, and just the context of that whole other challenge.
Right. So January is a way to take every day in January from the 1st to the 31st, and you begin with what's called the prompt, where you just describe something. Usually they'll take, for example, a very simple prompt, or they'll take an historical visual and say, this is what the prompt is. Okay. And this is where I got to use a couple of other packages that I didn't mention. One's called GeoCanvas, which is based upon the Geo toolkit, which is a way to do graphics and UIs natively on Mac, Windows, and PC. And I created a package called, again, GeoCanvas, which takes those same ideas of using those high-level objects on a percent-based canvas to create those. A lot of times, things in January tend to be a lot more interactive. Things like, but DeckShell are sort of static things. But with Geo and GeoCanvas, I get to exercise that aspect of it as well. So it's kind of an interesting kind of process to go from, I may sketch it in DeckShell, but then I may run over to Geo and GeoCanvas to do it there, because you can do things like, again, use things like random number generation, using mouse interaction, different palettes, and that kind of thing. One more package that I want to mention is called FC, which is called the Fine Canvas. Fine is another sort of cross-platform Go platform for doing graphical applications. Again, same idea. Same ideas take those same ideas that we go from SVG Go and DeckShell, percent-based canvas, graphical objects. Then you can, again, add a bit of interactivity and that kind of thing. So January, I'd sort of heard about it, but I hadn't really participated in it. So this year I said, let me try some stuff. So I created a few things for that. So that was very, very useful. Again, I use GeoCanvas primarily for that one as well.
Circling back to the patterns that you're seeing either in January in the Du Bois Challenge or just generally having been in this space for a while, I'd love to kind of chat a little bit about how you're seeing the general community receive Go in this space. if there's been changes since initially you were thinking about it. I know you are a big advocate for Go in kind of visualization space, but would love to hear kind of your observations around the broader tech community's receptiveness to Go in this space where, I mean, I will put my hands up and say, before I met you and had the pleasure of having you open my eyes to Go's uses in this space, I had kind of self-classified Go as a very much back-end language.
Right. I will say in the community, it's still that way. And I sort of fight the good fight to try to push against that. So, for example, one of the things I did a couple of years ago was to try to get, it's the first time I did a Go proposal, to try to add a very simple thing when you're doing your API or you're doing your documentation for your package. It would be nice to have illustrations to those. So that was a proposal. So that's sort of one thing that I'm working on to try to get people to think sort of beyond the sort of dry language and that kind of thing. So let me go off a bit about documentation as well. I find that I spend a lot of time when I'm, let's say, developing on DexShell. Let's say I add a feature. It will take me, let's say, I don't know, a day to add it. It may take me twice that to do all of the documentation for that, because I take that very seriously. I want people to be able to pick it up. And again, I do all my documentation in DexShell, of course. I want people to be able to look at that and get a keen understanding of what it takes to do it. So I have lots of examples. I'll add things like colors and that kind of thing so that people can use that as reference. I tend to use it myself, even though I've written the language. Oh, what did I mean for that one? Oh, this way. So, and again, that sort of talks to how do you build a DSL? And I got to claim that Go is perfect for building things like domain-specific languages. Because you've got the things to be able to do parsing, to be able to break up your input, to do your parsing, and then once you have that, how do you do your generation from there? So yeah. So to answer your question, I can't say that I've got big uptake on using that. There's been a lot of people who, again, over the years, because it's been around for a while, of using SVG Go, which has actually been supplemented by a thing called GenSVG. All of the bad things, decisions that I made back then in 2010, I wanted to correct with that. And again, if you look on speakerdeck.com/AJ Starks, you'll see the documentation for all of those. So I always want to have, this is the code, this is the picture. Side by side, I always find that a very powerful way to think about it. Again, that was from processing. Processing sort of pioneered that for me, and that idea of having interactivity. And that's another thing that I like to build into my tools. So I'll have a text editor, I'll have, let's say, a PDF viewer, and I'll hook them up so that if I make a change in the code, I can immediately see the change. And this is where Go is very useful, to be able to build performant code, to be able to make that change very quickly and then see it updated almost immediately.
This is a changelog news break. GPT Script is a new scripting language to automate your interactions with LLMs, which for now just means OpenAI. From the project's homepage, quote, "The ultimate goal is to create a fully natural language-based programming experience. The syntax of GPT Script is largely natural language, making it very easy to learn and use. Natural language prompts can be mixed with traditional scripts such as Bash and Python, or even external HTTP service calls." End quote. The project includes examples of how to plan a vacation, edit a file, or run some SQL. The central concept is that of tools. Each tool performs a series of actions similar to a function, and GPT Script composes the tools to accomplish tasks. You just heard one of our 5 top stories from Monday's Changelog News. Subscribe to the podcast to get all of the week's top stories and pop your email address in at changelog.com/news to also receive our free companion email with even more developer news worth your attention. Once again, that's changelog.com/news.
So I would love to, because we talked a little bit about kind of the past, the reception that you've seen. I would love to hear if we've seen any impact / your personal thoughts on how, and yes, I am going to talk about AI, it's the buzzword, either has already changed the space or your personal perceptions on how it might.
I think people are just beginning, for example, to see, I mentioned, for example, the bad defaults that you get with tools, and maybe AI can help. So in a lot of ways, AI can be helpful for implementing things like best practices. So if you can say, make a visualization in the form or style of, let's say, Alberto Cairo, right? So that is very, very useful to be able to codify that and understand what that means. That being said, I'm a huge AI skeptic, the way that it's been implemented, in the past year, especially when you're talking about data-driven graphics and things like that. If you rely on it too much, the sort of tendency for hallucination is very bad. You can make a pretty chart, but if it's, making up data or doing that kind of thing, that's very, very bad. So what I'm going to claim is I think it has a role, especially in codifying best practices and things like that. I have just very, very minimal use of things like the coding. I tried it once. I said, let's build something with SVG Go. It didn't do well. Because it's one of those things that it'll get it like 90% of the time, and then you've got to fix it up. So I'm like, I'll just do it. So I believe that those things will get a lot better, and a lot of the sort of boilerplate and things like that will go away. I'm all for that in order to make people productive. But that's sort of where I am on the AI space. I continue to sort of monitor it, but I can't say that I've got much practical experience with it.
For sure. And do you have, just out of interest, similar feelings around AI's use in the formal art scene?
I do. So, for example, the sort of money grab that's happening right now, that's hoovering up people's work without attribution and those kinds of things, I think is problematic, right? On the one hand, if you say, make a visualization in the style of Du Bois, I think that's probably fine. But if all you're doing is just copying and pasting, let's say my work or other people's work, that's not so great. So I'm monitoring things like the New York Times is suing OpenAI for, basically just slurping up its content and pushing it back out. That's not cool for me. So I think there needs to be some kind of way. And right now we're sort of in a gold rush right now. But I don't think we need to pause, but I think we need to consider artists' work and that kind of thing. So just hoovering it up and just pushing it back out, that's not cool.
Yeah, and I think just something that I had been thinking about before we jumped on to this episode a little bit was around thinking specifically on the work you've done around Du Bois' work, how for me, a core reason that I thought that was so wonderful and incredible was that not only are you allowing people to, experiment with the tooling, explore a new area of tech, but it is the historical relevance and being able to propagate this really important messaging, piece of history, continuing to revisit this point in time to learn is just such a core part of that work that I know you've done. And I think one of my core apprehensions is around losing, and this is in the art world, visualization, especially when it's in reference to specific people who have done visualizations, i.e. Dubois, missing that historical part and missing the context around the kind of almost puzzle pieces that you're using when relying on a tool that doesn't have that context. It's, it's an algorithm.
That's correct. And I think that context is a really important word. These LLMs and so forth tend to lack the context. They're ingesting lots of things and doing predictions, which in many cases is fine, especially, again, if you're sort of codifying, quote, a best practice. But, for doing bespoke work, for doing new work, we still need humans for that. And we still can't just suck it up and push it back out. Now, in the future, I believe that there'll be a new genre of work that is just AI, right? So you sort of know that it's AI generated. It will have its own style. It will have its own way of looking. I believe that that's probably where we're headed. Instead of just kind of, let's just imitate what, great people have done, it will be its own thing and it will be its own way. Sort of like, I'm also a student of photography, and, there was somewhat of a backlash against, for painters when photography came on the scene. And in many ways, the early photographers were imitating the painterliness and so forth of oil paintings or watercolors. But eventually, it became recognized as its own thing, right? So, people don't really think about, you're just trying to make it look like a painting anymore. Photography has its own aspects. It has its own things that, artists have been able to use. I believe same thing will happen with AI. And again, it will have its own genre and so forth. Already, I can sort of look at something and said, oh, yeah, that was an AI thing.
That's a talent. I feel like I have seen some AI generated imagery that I could not tell.
Right. And I'm sure that that's out there. But in certain cases, certain genre and things like that, I said, oh, yeah, I know what you did for there. But I think, again, just like painting to photography to film and those kinds of things, artists will embrace that medium and make it their own.
I am very excited, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
I feel like it being a new medium, a new tool, and almost the artist's tool belt to use is really exciting. I mean, I personally, my favorite types of art and theater are the ones where they bring together all these different multimedia forms, i.e. when you have an immersive theater piece that has sound, it has video, it has projection, it has live video, it has, art, perhaps.
Right.
And similarly, the kind of multimedia art space has always fascinated me. So I'm excited to see how artists utilize it in that way. But I would agree that your comment around the initial fear when a new medium comes in, the somewhat, I guess, protectiveness around like this is going to take away, especially for people who make their, livelihoods in that space. So I think it's as with most things around ML, it's like the excited, cautiously optimistic, we'll see where this goes.
Right, exactly.
I feel like I could babble about this for hours. But to bring it back to kind of our core topic for today, all around kind of using Go, visualizations, for our listeners who either have, software engineering experience but have never done anything of this nature, or for people coming in and entire newbies, this is maybe they listen to this podcast and they're thinking about starting to write Go, and this happens to be the first episode, you're welcome, that they hear. How would you advise them to get into this space, to start learning? What is a good first step?
I would say take a look at things or some visuals that are important to you. So, for example, some kind of metrics or something that's happening on your job. A lot of jobs are metrics driven. Take a look at how they're produced and sort of see, how can I make this better? Take a look at the effort that goes into actually building those and think, maybe I could automate this. Maybe I can, again, using the data, again, this is where sort of that pipeline of data to program to visual, where Go is very, very useful for doing that. So take a look at that. So if there's, for example, a dashboard or report that you're working with on your job, take a look at that and see how might I build that myself? How might I automate that? How may I make that better? That might be one way to begin, because that's sort of how my journey began. I was just frustrated and lazy with the tools, and I use what's called, programmer's hubris. Because I could build a tool, I did. So again, if you're a developer, especially if you're a Go developer, you can again use this pattern of, read, transform, and push out. And again, Go is very, very useful for that. There are tools, for example, there's the JSON marshalling, there's XML marshalling and unmarshalling. There's even a CSV package. Those things are part of the Go standard library. So you don't even have to go beyond what's in the standard library to get started. So again, in short, start with some data or visual that's important to you and go from there.
And then I know you've mentioned kind of a few of your libraries, packages, some of the standard library. Is there a place or one library that's a good starting point for a very simple visualization? Or is it really go in, have a look at all of the ones that you've referenced in this episode and see which one fits your use case the best? I'm kind of interested. You kind of outlined really nicely, how do you start in terms of thinking about use cases? Once you have your use case, okay, I have this graph. Yeah, it seems like it took a lot of time to put this together. I want to try and build this with Go. What is almost the first port of call?
So for me, again, for Go, there's not that many tools other than mine to be able to do that. So for example, I would start with the dchart program. Again, you could just download that and build that. You could just do a Go install and boom, you have it. And then just start with some CSV files or some tab separated files, and then just start playing with it. So, you say dchart and you give it a file and boom, you've got it. Then you can just pipe that to the thing that makes a PDF and then look at it. Oh, that's kind of what I want. And again, I like to take an iterative approach, because what dchart does is it gives you a toolbox of stuff. So it will start with what I call good defaults. But again, one of the things that I learned from doing the Du Bois work is throw out the defaults. Be bold and start to take, if I do this with this particular piece, it will be better. If I take this piece and put it this where, I can do better. So start with the defaults and then start to tweak as your own. And because they are command line tools, once you've got it, you can automate it. Okay, it becomes a script that you just run all the time. So one of the things that I did in my previous job was we were creating lots of tools from a ServiceNow, right, which is sort of what you use for user tickets and things like that. So I would gather lots of data from there, and I hit a button every week. I would create a whole set of charts and graphs for that. And once I got it the way that I wanted, I just hit the button and there they go. So again, use automation, but start, download dchart, download PDF deck. Those are the two tools. And again, from there, you can do a lot of things from there. And again, consult the documentation, because I spend a lot of time on those. I would love to get other people's feedback on how good the documentation or what I can do to make it better.
I need to now go back and look at all the documentation, because I feel like you've told us about how much time you spent on it. I'm excited to see stellar documentation. That being said, I say that, I pause before the end of that sentence. Seeing any documentation is incredible.
Right.
Awesome. Well, before we move on to our kind of final section of Go Time, which is unpopular opinion, I want to make sure that there's nothing left unsaid to our wonderful listeners. Is there any kind of final thoughts, whether it be getting into this kind of work, jumping into the front end world, perhaps for some of our back end engineers, the apprehension is real, before we kind of turn over to our final segment?
Again, I'll take my sort of marching orders from Du Bois. He had, be intentional about what your work is. Have, a message in mind, and, be bold. He was bold. Again, if you look at the visuals, nice colors and things like that to attract attention. Be intentional and be bold with your work. You can do a lot with very few tools.
It's been an absolute pleasure chit-chatting. And no doubt I'll probably have to come back to you in a few months when AI has taken over graphing and visualizations in whatever way, and we'll have to revisit.
Oh, it started already.
I know.
you can do these things in Tableau and things like that. So yeah, it's started.
It started already. Well, we'll keep our listeners posted. And I, for one, will be keeping an eye on Twitter to see how it influences the next January.
I actually think you should probably leave.
So, regrettably, or beneficial for you, you are my only wonderful guest today. So you're going to have an unpopular opinion, otherwise I'm going to have to make one up.
I've got a couple, but let's start with a more modest one. This mania for dark mode in your IDE and your editors has to stop.
Tell me more.
It's terrible. It sort of looks like Skittles on black velvet. So I tend to be sort of classical and minimalist in my view. So when's the last time you wrote something on black paper? You just didn't. It's not done. So I prefer a light mode with very, very minimal syntax highlighting. So the minimal syntax highlighting is, it's mostly black on white text. On a white background. Crimson for your keywords. Gray for your comments. That's it. That's all you need. And if you look at that, you'll say, I feel better. It's nice. It's not, again, like Skittles on black velvet. So, dark mode can be very useful for visualizations and things like that. I tend to pull that out. But for programming environments, that's a no for me.
I feel like it makes it so much more fun when you can look at it and it's like bright and it's rainbow and it's beautiful. You look at, I don't know, maybe it's just me. I look at my VS Code and when it's like covered in color, it just brings me such happiness.
Okay. It's like Christmas.
It's like Christmas lights. You're not going to put...
It's like Christmas lights at night.
You're not going to put one kind of Christmas light on your house. You're going to cover it all over. Maybe this is giving you an insight into how I decorate for Christmas.
That's true.
For me, I think dark mode... Actually, let me ask a clarifying question. Is this specific to code editors? Is this specific to doing the work of a programmer, or do you have qualms to be had with like dark mode on iPhone or dark mode on Mac? I'm intrigued to see how unpopular this opinion stretches.
To me, it's mostly in programming environments. But for example, the desktop that I use has a dark mode. You can just hit the button and it's dark. Immediately, I want to flee once I turn it on. It's depressing. It's like, I feel like I'm huddled in my basement and, I've got lights winking at me. I'd rather it be open and classic. So it doesn't work well for me in sort of desktop environments either.
Oh my gosh, I feel like it might be a comment on our personalities there. We've got clean and classy, and then we've got just a all over the shop.
Well, that's okay. I mean, it's a taste, right? But it's, and again, an unpopular opinion. So
no, I think it's a good one. I'm intrigued to see what the Gopher community says. Okay, so we've had that one, which turned out to be not as tame as perhaps you thought it might be. What is another unpopular opinion? I think we have time for one more. So, which of the many you've thought of, pick the one that you hesitated the most to say.
So everybody talks about, the year of the Linux desktop and that kind of thing. I'm going to claim it's here and it's fine. All of the work that we've been talking about has all been done in a Linux desktop. It works fine, especially for kind of work that I'm doing, if I'm doing programming and visuals and that kind of thing. In fact, in 2019, I had a problem. I've been using a Mac since 2002. Right? So for a long time. And I didn't like one aspect of it. For example, I'm doing these visuals and I'm refreshing, the PDF viewer. The PDF viewer just didn't work well. So let me try this on Linux. Will it work? It worked nicely. And from there I said, okay, let me make a switch from, the Mac. Let me put, lots and lots of years behind me, and let's see if we can make the Linux desktop work for me. It has. And especially, in my case, my needs are kind of modest, because in any given day, what do you have? You've got a browser, you've got a text editor, you may have some kind of graphic viewer, and you've got a command line, you've got a shell. With those things, you can do a lot. And, again, it hangs together. You can argue about what desktop environment to use, GNOME, KDE, or whatever. It really doesn't matter that much. But for things like distributions like Fedora, which I use, it's solid. I'm able to do updates just pretty quickly. Every year, for example, Fedora will do, 2 times a year, they'll do a major OS upgrade. It's a command line. You hit it, you're done. It tends to work well, less for me. So for me, the Linux desktop has already arrived. There's no point in arguing about it anymore. It just works.
Well, I'm intrigued. That's another one that's intriguing to see what people think about. I, for one, have been Mac always.
Right.
And I'm very, the more I hear about it, the more I'm like, okay, maybe I should give it a go.
Now, the Mac is still very exciting, right? Especially with, the M1, the M series. I've been very tempted. That looks really good. It's really fast. And in fact, there are people who are moving things like Fedora to the Mac natively.
Okay.
Asahi Linux, man, that's coming along pretty well. So maybe we can have the best of both worlds.
I mean, that would be the ideal.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Thank you.
It's been too long. I feel like we need to check in more often. And on that hopeful note, we're going to conclude our outro.
All right. That is go time for this week. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to check out our reboot of the much beloved Ship It podcast. New hosts, same changeloggy goodness. Give it a listen at shipit.show or search for Ship It wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks once again to our friends at Fly.io, to Breakmaster Cylinder for beat freaking for us, and to Sentry.io. Save $100 off their team plan by using code CHANGELOG when you sign up. That's all for now, but we'll talk to you again next time on Go Time.